Hi, I'm Laura Nownes. If you've ever been disappointed in the way your bindings look, then please stay with me as I show you my favorite technique for attaching binding. I cut my binding strips on the straight grain of the fabric, and generally I cut them 2 1/4 inches wide. Unless you're working on a very small quilt, you're going to have to sew several of these strips together in order to make it all the way around the outer edge of your quilt top. So the easiest way I have found to join these so that the angle is accurate is to place your 2 fabric strips right sides facing. So right sides together. And notice that I have offset the strips a little bit, which means that I have a little extension here on the side as well as on the top. And what that allows me to do is clearly see my starting point and my ending point when I stitch diagonally across the 2 strips. Okay, after you've done that, then you are going to simply just cut the excess and leave your 1/4 inch extension beyond your stitching line. Okay, you can use your scissors, you can use your rotary cutter, whatever is handy and easy for you. And then to eliminate the bulk, I'm just going to press this seam open. Okay, so just take it to your pressing board and press that seam nice and flat. And the final step is to turn and press the full length of your binding strip so that the right side of the fabric is facing out and you have it folded in half. Okay, now you're ready to attach the binding onto your quilt. Always allow extra because you need a little bit more for turning the corners and joining the ends. So don't be too skimpy on cutting your strips. Next, I do what I call a trial run. I've started the stitching here, but actually I would just take my binding strip and arbitrarily choose a starting point. I usually pick somewhere on the bottom edge of the quilt, and I will just simply lay the strip around the outer edge, all the way around. And what I'm looking for in doing this is those seams that join the strips together. I want to make sure that those seams don't fall in one of my corners. If they do, then I simply readjust my starting point, and if the corners are clear and free of any of the seams, then you're good to go. Okay, at the starting end, leave a good maybe 5 or 6 inches unsewn, and then with your walking foot on, with an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance, you are going to start stitching through all layers. So this is your quilt top, the binding is on the quilt top, and you're stitching through the quilt top, the batting, and the backing. You're going to stop a 1/4 inch before you reach the end of the quilt. And remember, you always have raw edges of the binding to the outer edge of the quilt top. When you come to within a 1/4 inch of that corner, take a few little back stitches to secure the stitches. Then take the quilt and the binding out of the sewing machine. Lay it flat on a surface, and then you take your binding strip and fold it. So you have a nice 45-degree angle right here. What you're looking for is that the raw edges of the binding are even with the raw edges of your quilt top. Make sure this is accurate because this will really make an effect on the finished. All right, so once you've pressed it away, then you're going to turn and press. And be careful here. Okay, so what you're looking for, a couple of things. Again, raw edges, even the folded edge up at the top needs to be perfectly even with the top raw edge of the quilt. And also take a peek to see that these 2 layers are evenly stacked. And then you know that it's square onto the quilt. Then back into the sewing machine and start right at the very top, again with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you're going to stitch all the way down the side, again stopping a 1/4 inch from the next corner back stitch, take it out, and then repeat the process. Next, you'll see why it's so important to have extra length on that binding strip. I'm going to cut a little piece off of one of the ends, just like this. The exact length doesn't matter. And take this piece, open it, and place it directly below your starting end. I usually put a pin in here just so that it doesn't slip around. And now, here's the important words. This is your mantra. The overlap of the beginning and the ending strips will be equal to the width of your strip. So if you cut your strip 2 1/4 inches wide, which is what I'm suggesting, then this overlap is exactly 2 1/4 inches. So let me back that up again, okay? Here's the width indicated here by the strip. Here's my starting end, overlap, and cut. Okay, this little piece is just a guide, but it is so helpful and so important in giving you a nice join where your strips come together. All right, and there we have the 2 ends that are overlapped and ready to be sewn together. Now, often when you're working with a large quilt, this next step can become a little bit cumbersome because you're trying so hard to get these ends together and you have all this bulk in the middle. If you will simply take your quilt, and depending on the size of your quilt, you may need a couple of pins here, but because I'm just working on a small sample, I think I can do it with 1. So I'm pinning it like this. So what it does is it just brings the ends closer, and it's a little bit easier now for me to make the join. So I'm working backwards, so I'm gonna have to flip my mind around here for just a second. But I want you to see that I am going to join these strips. You see this one right side up, and this next one right side down, okay? Remember how you joined those original strips? The same thing is going to happen here. And I hope that you can see through all of this. What I'm going to do is pin it, because I think we will achieve the same effect. Okay? I can see we're going to just make a little trip to the sewing machine so that I can show you how this works. I want to be real clear on the placement of this because it's so easy to twist these strips. Notice the placement of the strips, and I'm going to put them into the machine and then stitch diagonally across. Let me get this pin out of the way so you can follow me here. Right all the way down. You pull it out and cut so you can see. Okay. All right, there we go. Now, again, to eliminate bulk, take your scissors, cut that excess, press the seam flat, open, like so. Remove the pin that's holding your quilt together. Isn't it just like magic? This is the part I love. And then it just fits in there perfectly flat. And your last step is to go back to your starting point, catch those first few stitches, just like that. All right, I'm going to clip this little extra here, and then finally you're going to fold this and turn it to the back side of your quilt and hand stitch all the way. Now let me slip this under here so that I want to tell you a little bit about these corners, because what happens here that's so wonderful is you will end up with a beautiful miter on both the front side of the quilt and also on the back side of the quilt. And a lot of that is really just in the placement and the pressing of the strips. So I'm going to stitch by hand all the way up to the end here. And then I'm going to, let me get my hand out of the way, and then I'm going to turn the binding and fold it like this. So there we go. Let me just crease it so you can see. And hopefully you can clearly see what a beautiful mitered corner you get on the back as well. And there you go. I just love this part. It's like magic.